Welcome to Think Big with Dan and Qasim. Join hosts Dan Melnick and Qasim Masood as they explore big ideas, limitless possibilities, and engage with visionaries, entrepreneurs, and thought leaders who dare to dream big, get inspired, motivated, and find practical tips for personal growth. Think big, dream bigger, and ignite your potential.
Welcome to Think Big with Dan and Qasim, and our guest today is Ben Aldridge. So, Ben, if you want to go ahead and introduce yourself, tell us where you live and what you do.
Yeah, so I'm Ben Aldridge. I am a fractional COO for CPG companies. I live in Austin, Texas.
Awesome. So, in terms of being a fractional COO, like what exactly does that mean, and like how do you, best serve your clients?
Yeah, so my business philosophy has been to be sort of a, like a Swiss Army knife. My best clients are the ones who are, business owners who love to create and market really amazing products, but don't necessarily have the bandwidth to be able to take care of the boring stuff like, sourcing, purchasing, inventory forecasting, fulfillment, dealing with 3PLs, dealing with vendors. So I've kind of made a career over the past 10 or 12 years out of, just being able to take care of the boring stuff.
That's awesome. So let's just take a few steps back here in terms of like your career. So
Yeah.
if you can just talk more about that, like how did you kind of like get into this field?
Yeah, so I've been here in Austin since 2011, and starting in 2015, I began working with, I got excited about the startup scene and began working with some small businesses in the consumer goods space. The first one was it was an interesting business model. It was called Bravelets. It was a fashion jewelry manufacturer, but jewelry for a cause. Anyhow, we don't need to get into their elevator pitch, but that was my first taste of working with a young company, 6 or so employees, and just being able to be in one of those, okay, roll up your sleeves because everybody's going to wear every hat. So that sort of role. From there, I moved on to a skincare company here in Austin. I was with them in-house for several years, and they're actually now a client of mine. And then after that, I worked for a toy manufacturer in Brooklyn, New York, and through them, got to do some really exciting stuff working with manufacturers in China, and I was even able to go visit manufacturers over there and that sort of thing. So over the past year or so, I've kind of hung out my shingle to do this same sort of work, back-end operations, but just fractionally. So, and that's been interesting and fun. The thing that I like about it is diversity of tasks throughout the day and being able to look into different parts of the business or different parts of multiple businesses, and it's really rewarding that way.
So in terms of operations, right, especially with CPG, it can be super complex. I mean, do you mind sharing just some of the top tips or, biggest mistakes that you see people make when they're, in the CPG space and, just from the operation side of things?
Yeah, the biggest mistake I've seen is just people not having a handle on their cash flow and just making sure that, there's somebody on staff, at least one person on staff, who is, regularly looking at that sort of thing and projecting out. And, I've seen it too many times where companies will, get too aggressive chasing top line growth and run out of cash. And, the two biggest contributors to those that I've seen have been either, on overspending on marketing, paying more than they can afford for pay-per-click advertising, or purchasing too much inventory, which is it's a good problem to have inventory on the shelf, but it's not making you any money if it isn't getting in the customer's hands.
Yeah, I was just going to say, cash flow is super important, right? And I think that's a very good point. I think, every business for sure is something that they should look at, but I mean, especially for CPG because it is so cash intensive. So I guess like on that note, right, like obviously cash flow is important. How do you kind of like work with your clients and like advise them, say, hey, listen, like, besides monitoring, like, what specifically, hey, it's like make sure that we are in a position where we're not spending too much and have enough to keep things going and keep the doors open.
Yeah. So for every client, it's always a different situation. But the real tell is looking at the income statement and just seeing, where are the most dollars spent, starting with the biggest items, seeing if there are savings to be found there, and just making sure that, as you're trying to right the ship or trying to control for costs, finding the big wins first and taking care of things that are either going to, move the needle in a big way or are going to be really low lift and just easy to flip a switch.
For
So,
sure.
for example, one of my clients this week, asked me to take a look into some cost savings things. And I found that they were using a credit card payment provider that was, a little bit more expensive than what I would have expected. So I, shopped around for processors and, saved them like 20 grand a year for, a couple hours of work. And it's something that, is kind of repeatable throughout the business.
That's awesome. Yeah, I mean, like, I love where you can go in there and find savings. And I guess I'm curious too, because you had mentioned that you work for other industries, not just CPG, but even other like retail e-commerce. So, obviously things are different in every industry, but I guess I'm curious in terms of like cash flow, savings, operations. I mean, what are some of those differences, if at all, like when you are working with different verticals?
Yeah. Good question. I mean, the biggest expenditures like in a product-based business is going to be around inventory. Like we talked about, there's advertising as well. And then there are certainly people costs. I've never come into a situation where I'm making a recommendation that a customer would make cuts on that side. That's not good juju. I had a really great mentor early on who kind of, brought me up to speed with Lean Six Sigma, ideology and or methodology, I guess. And his thing was, don't put together a project where you're going to cut people. Instead, put those people to work and teach them the gospel of cost savings, as it were, and get them to hunt out projects.
That's awesome. Yeah, I think that makes so much sense. And yeah, like as you said, it's not good. But I guess like, from the operations side, it's like I sort of was in that space, way back when. And big thing there that's happening, right, whether you like it or not, is automation, right? I mean, it's just what it is. And unfortunately, it's AI and other machine learning robots are kind of taking some jobs away and maybe giving people different jobs. So how do you kind of like manage that, right? Because obviously at times, some people are not needed when the AI comes in or the robot comes in. But you also, it's kind of like this double-edged sword where you don't want to be the one saying, hey, like, listen, you might want to cut this person because of XYZ reasons. So how do you kind of like balance that kind of scenario?
Yeah, I mean, at its best, I've seen companies adopting AI strategies to be a multiplier for bandwidth rather than be, a replacement for headcount. And, if you've got a team of 10 who are using AI to their best advantage, those are 10 very powerful employees who can achieve a lot for you, every day. Give them the right goals, give them the right metrics, make sure that they're all tracking together. And man, cool stuff can happen.
For sure. And then obviously you work with clients. I mean, it seems like most of your clients are kind of more established. So at what is there like a certain stage you kind of look for? It's a good fit to, work with your certain revenue or certain place. Obviously, I'm assuming that for most brands, if they're just getting started, might not be a good fit. But I'm just curious more about that from your side.
Yeah, you're right. I do have more experience with companies that are a little bit more on the established side, but also one of my clients this year was a brand new startup who is actually should be launching later this year. And that's an exciting time to, be looking at operations because it's a chance to be able to get systems set up the right way the first go around and make sure that you're efficient from the jump and doing things in a way that's very strategic.
So yeah, in terms of a startup, right? Because obviously, like if somebody's using you, like you mentioned that one case study that I mean, just from this week, right, where
Yeah.
you came in and you saved somebody 20 grand. That's awesome. But I guess like for a startup, like is it more so just making sure that when they're launching, going to market, all their ducks are in a row with cash flow, with inventory, with manufacturing. It's like, how do you kind of, your role differ when you're working with a startup versus a company that's like a bit more established?
Yeah. When I'm working with younger companies or startups, it's being more of an advisory role in that, I've been there, done that multiple times with multiple companies and, can hopefully help to avoid some of the pitfalls and some of the mistakes that, you might make if it's your first time, say, sourcing a third-party logistics company or something like that.
No, yeah, that makes sense. Yeah, I mean, I think that there's so many players in the space when it comes to 3PLs, manufacturers, and operators, and it's like, I think it's good to have someone like yourself around because you can really guide people in the right direction. Because yeah, I think it's once you're kind of working with someone already in terms of like 3PLs or manufacturers, it's very hard to switch. So I think you being there from the beginning definitely adds tons of value.
Yeah. Yeah. Specifically with 3PLs, the switch is very difficult because, it's actually moving inventory. And when for example, one company that I had worked with, they had quite a bit of inventory with their 3PL and got behind on their payments to that 3PL and then tried to switch and of course couldn't move that inventory until they had come back up to speed with the billing with that company. So it's you give over a lot of control when you engage with a third party logistics company. But the gains that you make as far as capacity and especially variable capacity is you just can't replicate that in house.
That's awesome. So obviously now we're, still in Q1 of 2025. So it's really for your business. What are some of your biggest goals, objectives that you kind of want to accomplish, for your business and I guess even let's say for your clients as well?
Yeah. So just kind of with some of the economic factors that we're seeing right now, there's a lot of instability. I think that, it's a lot of companies are tightening up operations and trying to make sure that, they're not wasting cash. And I think that, now is certainly a time of a little bit of contraction on that side. And, once things get stabilized a little bit more economically, we can then kind of hit the accelerator. But I think at least from what I'm seeing in the companies that I've been working with, it's they're kind of hunkering down a little bit, as it were.
Yeah, that makes sense. I think it's definitely smart to hunker down, especially when there's times of uncertainty. I mean, when you're dealing with manufacturing tariffs, a lot of interesting conversations there. So you've been in operations now for some time now. So if you could go back in time to before you got started, what is the one biggest piece of advice that you wish you knew?
Start small and especially when it comes to purchasing. And I think that there's oftentimes manufacturers will dangle the carrot of economies of scale, but for young companies, for upstarts, it's really important to hang on to cash. And I think that even if you're paying a little bit of a premium to get a lower minimum order quantity, it's in your best interest until you can see that the demand is there to be able to necessitate more spend in that direction.
Yeah, for sure. I think that's the biggest thing. I think that when it comes to any business, but especially for product business, product market fit is important. And sometimes you think that, to your point, your product's going to fly off the shelves, but you really don't know. It's good to kind of be more diligent about that. So I guess on that note, if somebody watching this wanted to work with you or wanted to reach out, what's the best way for somebody to get in contact with you?
Yeah, so my website is aldridgeoperations.com. There's a form there to be able to reach out and set up an initial intro call.
Ben, thanks so much for your time today.
Yeah, thank you, Dan. This has been fantastic.
Of course.